start exercise 2.
Where should the student opposed to the free speech sit? That's me.
No, you're not.
Oh, I come in after.
You're actually the author of free speech, Lester.
I'm the author.
Yeah. Okay. Let me go through your roles. So I'm the principal. Now, I have called this meeting because the faculty advisor to the student newspaper, John, okay, has come to me and said, you know what, Lester gave me his first draft, and I don't think it should be published. Now, a little bit different from the newspaper Spectrum in Hazelwood. So it's not within like your journalism class. It's a bunch of students that meet after school, very interested in literary pursuits, etc. You are an English teacher. You meet with them after school. You advise them, etc. They've all given you the drafts that they're working on. You say, Lester, Lester created a little bit of a fuss saying free speech rights, etc. So we said, okay, let's call a meeting with the principal. So, and then Patricia happens to be a teacher also in support of Lester's article. Jadida is a teacher in opposition to the article. And then we have a couple of student reps, Ash, who is against the article, and Joe, who is for the article. And then I have my vice principal, Nadej, and town council, Cassandra. Okay, Joe?
Professor, shortly, Rich was a few minutes behind. He should be here in like 5
Okay,
minutes.
if he's here, just have him let's have him join you. Joe, where are you? So you can fill him in.
Middle, yeah.
I'll say Joe and Rich.
Okay.
And then I'll put him down here as well.
Gotcha.
Okay. So here we are ready to start this meeting, and I know that John Nealon has come to me and expressed some displeasure, dissatisfaction, whatever it is, and I'll let you speak first, at Lester's proposed article in the after-school newspaper that I believe you're a faculty advisor to the newspaper?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
Well, the article is hate speech. I mean, it's very not even really thinly veiled. It's focuses on blacks, it focuses on homosexuals, and this is a class where we don't really talk a lot about journalism. But I think it has some other problems with it too. I think it's kind of a this tirade that he's going on, and I think it's really of minimal value, and could create a lot of hurt among the students who read the newspaper.
Tell us a little bit about actually Lester, because I know you've been a student editor of this newspaper for the past 2 years, I believe. You're a senior now?
I am a senior.
Tell us about this newspaper first.
Well, it's a student newspaper.
How many students contribute? Is it a regular sort of thing? How do students get inducted, so to speak? How do you decide?
Well, it's a class that we sign up for. Journalism.
Oh, I'm
class.
sorry. I thought it was an after-school
Yep.
that you guys do it after school.
Yep, the students come on their own free time after school, and we work.
I know that John is your English teacher regularly, and he may have reviewed this, but did you review some of the stuff in class, or?
Well, I do teach a journalism class, but this is more of it's not related to that class. It's kind of a elective or a club.
And so
really.
when the newspaper, and I know a couple other students are here from the newspaper, right? Joe and Ash?
Yes.
When the edits are finished and it's ready to go out, is it in print form? Is it online? Who gets it?
It's a printed document. We have agreement with a local printer.
Who pays?
Well, the paper is, it's largely funded by the school board, but we do sell the copies, which we get back maybe 25%. The school board pays about
Meaning your little group?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
we put out the paper, it's done by the journalism club,
Okay.
and we always have a little announcement in each copy that we would take.
So, and does the paper get, Ash, you mentioned something before, does this paper get mailed out to students and parents? Does it appear online? How's it distributed?
It's just distributed within the school system, so parents don't read it. It's just something that.
So is it like left out in the lobby or somewhere, you know, or is it distributed in class, or?
We give some of them, we hand them out to teachers to hand out in homeroom.
Okay.
And
Okay.
we also circulate them to some of the other businesses that are involved in the school.
And John, as the advisor, do you know, what is the mission statement, or what is the goal of this?
This is really more of a paper that encourages students' creative writing. It's less rigorous in terms of the journalistic standard, and I just try to make the final decisions, but I also try to talk with the students to make sure that they're on track and that they know that I'm not going to be able to allow certain things to be published.
So let me ask Cassandra, who's town council. Cassandra, I'm reading from a portion of Chapter 71, Section 82, the right of students to freedom of expression in the public schools of the Commonwealth shall not be abridged, provided that such right shall not cause any disruption or disorder within the school. And then it goes on to say that freedom of expression includes, and Part B says, to write, publish, and disseminate their views. Can I get your legal opinion on whether if we decided at this meeting, if John decided to not allow Lester to publish, would that be a violation of his rights?
Indeed, it would, because it simply says that freedom of expression should include, without limitation, the rights and responsibilities of the students to write, publish, and disseminate their views. C goes on to say that to assemble peacefully on the school property for purpose of expressing their opinions, and that's what's exactly going on. These kids are expressing their opinions, and they should be allowed to under this statute.
But is that right absolute? And I know we have a couple of teachers and a couple of students that are against this publication. Patricia, do you have any thoughts?
Absolutely. I think the students should be allowed to express their thoughts. It's just
you're in
one
support.
more
Okay.
version of anything that they see in a traditional newspaper. It's somebody's usually opinion backed up with facts, which is the case in this particular situation.
I just heard, Cassandra's, my recitation and then Cassandra's interpretation of our statute, but is that right absolute? Doesn't the school have some control over this paper? How does this Hazelwood case that Cassandra also put in her memo to me apply?
Well, it's something that's taking place after school. It's not in a structured classroom experience.
But Lester, didn't you say that the school board contributes some funds? I heard you say that earlier.
I did.
So doesn't that indicate there's some support coming from us, coming from the administration? And therefore, in a sense, are we putting our imprimatur on this paper?
That is
I know,
true.
Lester, you're a wonderful writer, but I'm worried about, other students being hurt.
Well, yes, but nothing I said in my piece was untrue and not carefully researched.
Well, that's your expression. Jadida?
I'm unfortunately against
What do you
it.
teach, Jadida?
I teach history and language.
Okay.
But I'm against. I do believe that students have a right to express themselves. However, if them expressing themselves is going to cause some kind of uprising or disruption in the school, I think to a certain extent it should be curbed. In Hazelwood, some of the students said that the school newspaper was a public forum, and the court in that case said.
But this is sort of a gray area that's I'm trying to tackle this in terms of how and to what extent Hazelwood controls our situation here.
Right. I think for the simple fact that the situation was similar in Hazelwood, and the court in Hazelwood said that because this newspaper is not something that outsiders read. It's something that the school is publishing, so it sort of represents the school, like the views of the school.
What's the name of the paper, Ash?
Free speech.
No, the name of the actual student newspaper. I know that's the name of Lester's article. What's the name of your paper, Joe?
The Leicester Times.
What's the name of the?
Oh, the Lester Times. Oh, okay. Ash just told me.
Yeah, the controversy.
The controversy. I like that, the controversy.
And again,
The racists.
was it Patricia who just said initially earlier that it doesn't actually get mailed out to families, it's just given out in a homeroom? Is that what you said,
Yeah,
John?
John said, and that is what they do here.
Cassandra,
I
town
want
council?
to answer your question
About Hazelwood?
when you asked, is it absolute?
Mhm.
The court in Hazelwood did reverse. The Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit did reverse it, and it basically said that the court
Well,
held.
Hazelwood was decided by the U.S. Supreme
The
Court.
US
I'm more concerned about what the
Well, it did
US
say that the court can conclude the spectrum of the status of the public forum, that basically the school officials should be able to censor the subject matter of what goes into the newspaper.
if it's in fact school sponsored, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
School-sponsored speech, such as articles in the student-run newspapers, are to be judged by the same standard as school-tolerated speech.
Ash, are you for or against?
I am against.
Okay, so continue with that.
Pretty much
what
the-
you're saying.
The free speech article written by Lester is backed up by a lot of emotion, and it can be reasonably argued that it's vulgar speech, and it causes disruption and disorder.
In what way? Nadej, have you, I know you handle frequently student complaints or students that come in and say, I feel like I've been threatened or bullied. Have you heard any to-do over this newspaper in general or the articles that are intended to be published?
Yes. Especially those students who have their parents that just got divorced. There've been
No, in the actual free speech article that Lester's intending to publish, have any students in our school come to you and said, I hear Lester's publishing an article, talking about people like me and I'm really offended? Has anything like that come up? Have the student reps perhaps heard anything?
Yeah, black students have come to me and told me that they're offended by the...
Maybe they haven't formally come to you yet, Nadej.
I've had students come to me as well.
You have, Jadida?
I had students come to me as well, especially since where it's Black History Month and in history class, I've had students come to me and, feeling some type of way about the article. Personally,
And that may be another sort of collateral issue because, as educators here, we also have to follow the anti-bullying statute. So in fact, if the student has been, felt threatened, intimidated under that statute, then you have to follow up and eventually, let me know. So if that's an issue, I'm not sure.
well, I've spoken to the students. They don't feel threatened. They just feel as if it's offensive. So I don't think it rises to the level of bullying. But they felt that it was offensive. But personally, even though we're talking about the law, personally, I don't see anything wrong with the article. I do think that it is free speech, but according to the school, being that we don't want any disruption or bullying or anything of that sort, I think it should be curbed.
Well, you mentioned, you used the word offensive, and I know that the SJC here decided the Powell case where there were all these vulgar T-shirts, and it started in federal district court, but ultimately the SJC decided that if it's and here we go to school sponsored again, if it's non-school sponsored expression, even if it's vulgar, students can do it as long as there's no disruption. So I wonder if what we're worried about in terms of the content of Lester's article, is it just that it's offensive? And again, as the school administration, unless we are really in total control, we don't have the right to do anything, right, John?
Well, I think when I'm looking at section 37O, where it defines bullying.
The bullying, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm noticing that there's about 5 different definitions, but one of them is when there's emotional harm, when it causes emotional harm to the victim. Mm-hmm. Another one
infringes on the rights.
Yeah, infringes on rights.
Substantially disrupts the education process.
That's and creates a hostile environment at the school, and I think those are all things that are going to just inevitably happen if we publish this.
Well, Joe, are you for or against?
I am for.
Okay, go ahead.
I
do you want to address John's?
I do.
Your advisors?
I do, in just in general. First, you know, Mr. Roberts' article that was published in this case obviously was in support of his election to the student council.
Oh, we haven't gotten to that yet.
Okay, I'm ahead.
We'll be debating that next.
All right. I'll save my comment.
Lester will switch roles for that.
All right, sorry, I apologize. I'm ahead of myself.
Oh, okay. But do you want to address?
I was just simply saying on that note, I mean, I know we've had some informal, information that's come forward here about some possible, or potential problems that are caused from this. You know, I mean, that's something that would be of cause of concern to me, even though obviously I support it. If there is some sort of violent issues that are coming out of this, I think it's something that needs to be, discussed, and obviously we need to make sure that we get to the bottom of that. Whether it's caused from the actual information that's been brought forward here, or if it's just people's, personal views. I know obviously you spoke about Black History Month. The timing of this article and case may not be right.
I'm concerned about, not only children of color here in this school, but perhaps gay students as well, or students perceived to be gay, that this article might incite. Lester, you haven't talked for a while. I know you're taking this all in.
I did a lot of research for this piece.
Yes, you said that.
And I found news items that the national press is not covering. And I think, in fairness to all of our readers, they should be aware.
Lester, do you think your paper is a little biased? Is it only appealing to one group?
I have a right to document the news. That's what a newspaper's for.
And see, whether Lester is biased or not, he can be, again, if it's if we don't have as much control, John, as educators over this. I'm hearing they meet after school. A group of students. Lester's been here for a while, but some come and go, in terms of being editors or contributors to the piece. And other than they get some stipend from the school board, doesn't go to parents. What about the whole marketplace of ideas that you guys teach to these kids? Hearing the unpopular viewpoint
Yeah, I think Lester is a really smart student. I think the work that went into his article was significant. But when we look at kind of like the purpose of the article and the fact that we pass them out to the students. I mean, we really,
And you pass them out in homeroom and the teachers pass them out. So
Yes.
that is making it look like, again, the teachers are approving of it and controlling it to some extent. Ash?
Principal, I want to remind you that I'm pulling this out of the Education Reform Act.
Okay.
That if you know that Lester's article is going to pose a threat to the safety, security, and welfare of other students and the staff,
Exactly.
you are compelled to expel him, not just suspend him. I do want
Lester is outraged.
I have a right, this is public information that I put in my research.
But you also have to take into consideration the safety, security, and welfare of all the students and staff members. And that's more important than your crazy political ideas.
Why?
well, if we just,
My advisor here is responsible for what goes into the newspaper, the communicator. And I wrote this piece and I deserve credit for it.
what would your piece be like without any commentary or editorializing? What if we just got rid of everything and just put,
And started over
What-
on a blank slate.
yeah, or, I mean, what would remain if we took out all the comments? I mean, you're talking about 3 or 4 news stories, but most of it is actually commentary on the how the news is reported and things like that. And
That's my viewpoint.
right, that's what I'm saying. I think it's a viewpoint that is going to create disharmony in the school, and I just wanted to emphasize that I think your article is mostly viewpoint.
Well, the fear of somebody being offended should not constrain me.
Well, can I just say, we don't have the fear, we actually have people who are offended. It's not just the fear of people being offended.
I'm sorry.
All right. I'll take this under advisement. What do you think? Just off the record now, without your roles being played. And what does it depend on, in terms of if we had to vary the facts?
In
Richard?
regards to like the bullying statute, I just think it's so subjective. We're doing a definition that says, well, if
In terms of this fact
yes,
pattern.
well, if I feel bad about it, or if it makes me feel bad, well, there might be a student who's not a great athlete, and we publish an article supporting all the jocks in the school. Then suddenly, oh, I'm offended because I'm not an athlete, you didn't talk about me. There has to be a kind of a bright line point where this is my opinion, I should be allowed to express it.
And also, we'll go through the bullying statute more later on when we get to the chins and delinquency cases, but in order for educators to act, a student has to bring it to the attention of the teacher, the educator. And then, I mean, all the schools now have plans and they have reports that they need to make, but again, so what the principal just heard in this mock hearing was, as you said, Richard, very general, and there weren't, that's why I was trying to get an edge to say, oh yes, and I have a report, by, an unnamed student writing, I'm not gonna air it here, and I'm acting on that now, blah, blah, blah. So, good point related to that. What else, Cassandra?
I just think that, yes, in support of Section 82, students should be free to write and express themselves and their opinions, but I think it should be limited on sensitive topics and issues that can potentially risk a student's welfare and safety.
And what's the test? What's the standard?
Well, the standard is, even if it's vulgar, it's going to be allowed.
Because right now we're talking about publication, so it's the Hazelwood case that is the mandatory authority, for Massachusetts and for all the states. So what's the standard under Hazelwood? And I kept trying to push it. Lester, what was the standard for me deciding as the principal or the school board deciding that you shouldn't go in the paper?
If it was going to substantially...
But before you could get to if it was going to substantially, you have to look at the nature of the paper itself.
Yeah.
And ask what question, Joe?
Does it cause a disruption or disorder to the
No,
school?
look at the nature of the paper itself. That's why I was asking questions of John before,
The style and
Patricia.
content.
How is it subsidized?
Exactly, is this a public forum, or is it school-sponsored? Because that's what, you know, the Supreme Court ended up coming down on, the fact that Spectrum was in fact controlled. It was within journalism class, and you started to say that at the beginning. I was like, no, it was after school for our case, right? And because it was so controlled, the educators then had the right to, you know, interfere with it, right?
I guess,
So is it the proper forum?
Is it a public
What kind of
forum?
forum is it should be asked first, right?
I guess it's a school.
No, our hypothetical is very gray, right? In terms of, it doesn't fall very neatly under Hazelwood. It's a bunch of students coming after school. They've asked, you know, unofficially, you don't get, we forgot to bring up, you know, you don't get paid for this. You know, it isn't part of your regular school day. You stay after school, give them advice. You're an English teacher, you love this stuff, you know. And these are kids that love to write and so forth. They get some money from the school board, and then, you know, that makes it iffy as well.
Kind of
Good
puts a mark of
participation,
approval
huh?
on it. It kind of puts its mark of approval on it, doesn't it, when they get money from the school board?
And hand it out in class,
Right.
you know. And then the fear of the bullying, again, as Richard said, it may be too general, but
So
show of hands.
So if it's a public forum, then the school is not allowed to get involved?
Well, not to, you know, then you get into other questions, right?
There was something in Hazelwood about that.
Yeah, go
It
ahead.
says, I just wrote in my own words, but it said Court of Appeals reversed on the grounds that the school newspaper is a public forum intended to be operated as a conduit for student viewpoint. School officials cannot censor its contents except when necessary to avoid material and substantial interference with schoolwork or discipline.
And that's what you started to say before, Lester, when I cut you off.
Right.
Mhm.
So it boils down to, if it's something that's, again, sponsored by the school, because the school's paying for it, the teachers are part of it, then they do have a right to censor the student's opinion to avoid disruptions. But if it's something that the students are, you know, putting together themselves, has nothing to do with the school, then
Again, unless
Right.
it begins to, if it begins to be so hurtful,
Right.
so, you know, and then we have a right, not only right, but a duty as the state to interfere. Tricia?
Now, in reality, if something like that was happening now, wouldn't you say that John's solution of modifying what was actually said, in other words, taking out any opinion and
Right.
just doing a comparative
But
maybe
this dude
analysis?
was obstinate and refused to
I got
do
the
anything
impression
with
that
his
he was
articles.
obstinate about reporting on the situation. So if John or the teacher advisor just redirected them to doing maybe a comparative analysis, so you're showing equally both sides?
Sure, sure.
Without the opinion and the graphic language of sitting in a pool of blood, that type of thing.
Exactly.
So a lot of editing to make it acceptable,
Right, right.
so as to be able to pass through.
And then there would have been no
No
need
issue.
for this,
Right.
right.
for this hearing. Yeah, very good. All right. Number 3. Okay, now we're just all faculty. So, Randall Roberts, you're off the book, Lester, you're not a person anymore.
I didn't like my role.
Sorry.
I couldn't
That's
tell.
pretty harsh on you.
It's like, you're doing good.
There was just a student assembly with a big to-do because Randall Roberts talked about all this stuff. He was running for, you know, student council, and so I just got together with some of my faculty and said, gee, you know, what should we do? And there's my question. What shall we do about Randall Roberts? What, if any, disciplinary action should be taken against him? And again, from the foundation that, yes, 7182 is the statute that governs, but we know that that's not absolute. He's spoken some things that have, you know, outraged some students. It got back to you know, the administration, and I'm wondering, as the principal, that, you know, should he be disciplined in any way? If he is disciplined, what should it be? And also, what rights does he have? What liabilities or duties do we have? Okay. So here's your role. I have John, Jadida, and Ash, 3 teachers for Randall Roberts, meaning, you know, he's okay, whatever he did, blah, blah, blah. Patricia, Lester, Joe, and Rich are teachers against Randall Roberts. You want to do something about him. Nadej and Cassandra are undecided, so you could go both ways. You could ask questions of the others. Okay? So here we are. What are we going to do? And school is still in session, so if, depending on what decision you make, you know, I'll have Randall Roberts, you know, called to the office, and, you know, we'll let him know what we're doing and why and so forth. All right? So whoever wants to speak first, go ahead. And when you speak, tell me what your decision is.
I'm the physics teacher.
Okay.
And I think his speech was shameful.
Okay.
And I think at the very least, the child should write an apology and either give it at the next assembly or put it in the school newspaper, or it was offensive and it was shameful. I mean, yes, there's the First Amendment, but this is a school. We have to take everyone into account, not just the person who's speaking.
Is he allowed to be a candidate still, or?
You know, I think we need to discuss that.
Good. Yeah.
I wouldn't, you know, say preclude him from his candidacy at this point, but his speech was not acceptable.
Well, what wasn't
Well,
taken into account was that the high school has 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th graders, 12th graders, so the upper grades may have been able to handle the subject matter a little bit better with the graphic language, but definitely not the younger ones.
As an adult, I find it offensive.
I beg to differ, because these students, they, most of them, you know, are aware of what's going on in this country politically, and they follow the news and they see these things every day. They see people like, what was his name? The one that talked about the girls in Princeton.
Talk about what?
He spoke about the Princeton girls. I forgot his name. Howard Stern.
Okay.
They hear people like Howard Stern speak all the time, and these people are able to express their opinion on whatever the subject may be, however offensive it may be to one, but it's just somebody's opinion. And, you know, as students, we're preparing them here for the real world. So I don't think it was offensive.
Also,
I think that was just his opinion.
Good point. So, you know, as an educator, I'm dealing with, you know, children that are going through all kinds of stages of development.
Right.
So, you know, what they believe in, say, one day may change as they mature, etc. So I hear, you know, Lester saying about how it's offensive to him, but does that really cut it? Are we not, if we do something and, you know, call him in and say you shouldn't have done that, whatever we decide, are we sort of obstructing his development as well? And also his right as a student to freedom of expression. I think Richard had his hand up first.
Although subtle, I think Randall's article amounts to hate speech. Whether we want to say it is or it isn't, it's us to determine what type of effect. This article was recently put out. We haven't had time to see if this is going to cause material and substantial problems within the school. I think there is some grumblings from students going on about the article. I think it is incumbent upon us to proactively do something now rather than later. If we bring Randall in and give him some sort of sanction, maybe not pull his candidacy, maybe not, you know, express our opinions that it was improper setting for his article.
Well, now here's another point. So this was a speech given as part of student assembly. Students, you know, obviously they asked if they could get together in the, what's it called?
Auditorium.
Auditorium. to, you know, decide who they were going to vote for and hear speeches and whatnot. You know, obviously, we allow it; it's on the school grounds, but it isn't part of, you know, history class. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Cassandra.
I thought it was just out of place. What does it have to do with his candidacy? What does it have to do with?
Well, I guess he was expressing, you know, his views, his viewpoints, to saying, you know, running the student council, blah, blah,
But
blah.
what does that have
This
to
is
do
what,
with?
well, I think the other students, you know, he wants them to hear what his political or whatever views are, as they do when they're running for things,
Yeah.
right? Ash?
I disagree with the majority here.
The majority?
The majority is saying that this is hate speech. I'm actually the gym teacher here at
Okay.
Leicester High School. And Randall actually came to me. I was one of the advisors to helping him write the speech. And I was giving him points. And
Okay.
Tired.
We'll talk to you afterwards.
But no, I think you know, he's just expressing his views through speech, through, you know, freedom of speech, and he's able to assemble peacefully on the school property. You know, all he's doing is running for student council. You know, and to consider this as hate speech, I think would be a little bit premature.
How many disagree? Ash just said he's able to assemble peacefully. Was this a peaceful demonstration? Patricia and then Nadej.
Well, he seemed to wreak havoc with his opinionated statements that he was making. But it seems arbitrary and capricious because it was, what was the purpose of the speech? It was to promote himself for a student council. So his political opinions may matter to a degree, but in that explicit specificity, I don't know if that's quite appropriate forum for those particular thoughts. He should have been promoting the things that he could do for the student council as opposed to espousing his belief on a given situation as he saw it in the news.
I agree.
Nadej was next. Go ahead.
No, this is the same question that I was going to ask him. What's the purpose?
What was
What was the purpose?
Yeah, I
for
agree
the
with
speech?
Patricia because
Because there must be something behind it.
and
Does
what's-
anybody who was actually for
Actually,
him, could you enlighten us on
I
the
wanted to
purpose?
actually do like a sidebar because I've participated in student council and things of those sort in my, not undergrad but like junior high school, and one of the things they had us do, and this is just a sidebar again, they had
Doesn't
us
have to be sidebar.
okay they had us one speech, of course, what can you do for the school if you're elected, what would you do different, and then another speech they did have us, you know, address like political things that were going on, and I remember being in 6th
So it looks
grade.
like this is what Randall
Yeah, and
was
this is
doing.
what he
Okay.
did.
Okay.
So I don't
Okay.
think that it's
It was
out
just
of
compliant.
context.
And frankly, he may have fallen through the cracks. You know, I know that, again, even though it's a student-run thing, that they kind of formally or informally let us
Right.
know what's on the agenda, but, sorry, but again, it was brought to my attention afterwards that what he said might have been wrong. Sandra?
See, there's nothing wrong with expressing your opinion, but it's the tone and it's the possibility of it just provoking like
Okay.
certain emotions. I mean, when you talk about certain things, it's going to call for certain reactions. And if you read the article, it's just the tone of it. It's the anger behind it. It's the you just get a different feeling from it that
Okay.
would just really push a lot of buttons, as opposed to just, you know, stating his opinion. I got his opinion, but I think it still stirred up a little bit of more than that.
Judea?
I get what Cassandra's saying, but to say that this rises to the level of hate speech, I think is a little extreme. He's a student expressing his concern about.
Well, does it have to rise to the level of hate speech? One of you mentioned at one of our last hearings the Fraser case where the student who was also running for something, again, got on the stage and started saying things about a candidate that was engaged in all kinds of sexual endeavors and so forth, and the school was, you know, allowed to censure that type of speech. So is it just that it's maybe hate speech, or what other standards should we be guided by, John?
Well, I just wanted to say a little bit more because of the context of it. So this was when I think the other students appreciate. I think Randall Roberts was not a student that was going to get a lot of votes, and I think, you know, when you really look at his speech, it's a terrible speech. But this was an assembly that happened the period after lunch. A lot of the students were tuned out. A lot of the students, I know that a lot of times they can be very hurt, but I think some of them do appreciate Randall Roberts for what he is, and they can see that. I think we need to really maybe take a little bit more time and wait to see if there really is such a backlash against him, because like I said, he's not really a student that fits in so well in the first place.
Jadida?
Yeah, what I wanted to say before is everybody's complaining that it's offensive, and I can understand that. But again, if we look at the last case we read, Powell, it doesn't. If it's offensive to some, and we just look at it being offensive, then anything that students say, if it's offensive, then we would have to censor it. Going back to Tinker in those cases, because it's the unpopular view, then, oh, I'm offended, so then we have to stop it. So whatever it is the student says, oh, I'm offended, then we have to stop it. Then where do we draw the line?
Wait, Lester?
As a faculty, we are moved by the public to help our students develop good citizenship and sensitivity and a higher consciousness than just we can say what we want.
71 section 30, right? The moral education of children.
We
Is that
have
what?
to take a bigger picture. I wouldn't want my child up there saying those things that Roger said.
What about your child hearing those things?
He's gonna hear worse.
Knowing that that's just somebody else, another child's expression.
Well, we're talking about the speech that Roger gave.
Right.
Not about the...
Randall.
Randall, I'm sorry. Not about the children in the auditorium. We're talking about Randall. And his speech was insensitive, to say the least, and inflammatory to anyone, really. To anyone.
Thank you. Anybody else? Joe?
I would agree. I think whatever we define the speech as, I think it's clear that there needs to be some coaching or mentoring with regard to what's going in this, in this newspaper. I mean, certainly it's offensive.
You went back in time just now.
Speech.
The speech that he gave the assembly.
That's what I meant. This speech, and with regard to that, there needs to be some standard by which we operate. I mean, what stops somebody tomorrow morning from giving another controversial speech like this? And I just think in an area like this, timing and common sense have to have some play. And clearly, as was mentioned earlier, there was some people that were offended by this, and certainly it has a racial tone to it, and it has a tone in there of with regard to homosexuals and so on. So I just think it's not something that we should be promoting in the school, and clearly, whatever we decide to do, we need to at least have some counseling with Mr. Robert to ensure that this doesn't take place.
Another thing that concerns me is, suppose he is actually voted to student council representative of some of the students. I don't know if that concerns any. What's that?
I hope he gets in.
I know you do, Ash.
Sometimes you just have to stand for what's right, even if you have to stand alone. And I think that's what Randall.
But what your opinion?
Yeah.
What your right to air your opinions, as Tinker said. The students shouldn't be able to leave their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate.
He's not going to stay silent when he fundamentally believes what he's saying is the truth.
Patricia?
Well, it seems like he certainly wouldn't be afraid to share his peers' thoughts and feelings on situations, so we'd definitely bring him forward to the public forum. But again, it probably would be smart to have him tutored in just being able to curb his responses to be a little bit, or his innovation speeches to be a little bit more appropriate to the forum that he's addressing.
Okay. John?
Well, and also it seems like part of the public forum thing is that the school has opened it up, and it's sort of like we're trying to get the horse back in the barn, or whatever that expression is. It's too late, he's already made.
I know, I could never understand that.
The problem was we didn't really check in with what these students were going to say. We didn't give them guidelines. We didn't give them a focused question that they could give a speech
And
about.
there's been backlash.
Right.
Yeah, and I think we need to be conscious of that next time. But,
Okay.
some other students were up there. They said funny things. They weren't hurtful things, but they weren't really. They were kind of wasting time too.
Okay. Okay, so suppose it was really outrageous, and in fact, the students within that assembly were yelling back at him, and there was a little bit of pandemonium as a result, and that Nadej did really hear as vice principal at least a couple of students leading up to that, and immediately after that, we know we're just an hour after that meeting, went in and said that they also felt that this student has bullied them, whatever. So in any event, we're now deciding discipline, what form of discipline, what are his rights, okay? So.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so where are you?
Well, as I said at the beginning of our meeting, Randall needs to apologize for the hurtful and inflammatory.
So what sort of discipline would that entail?
Well,
Do you want a detention, a suspension? What
I
are you
don't think
saying?
those procedures in the discipline code are appropriate in this case. This is something that rises to the level of a public apology in the auditorium, a letter in the school paper, maybe in the town paper.
So to do that, I'm going to have to call him in, before the end of
Absolutely.
today.
We can talk to this child.
And I have to give him notice of what is it that what kind of infraction are we dealing with? What has he violated, if anything? Patricia, what has he?
Well, I'm not,
Done.
I think part of the responsibility is ours. As John said, no parameters were given, so we have to take our due responsibility. Should he be sanctioned? Maybe even just a warning that he
Well,
needs
I've
to-
heard that there's been a major disturbance, and students were actually fighting as a result within that school assembly. So I've got to do something. Sandra?
I do agree with Lester that there should be an apology, but I think that the students should address the other students and say that everyone, of course, has a right to speech and their own opinion, but it must be done in a tasteful and respectful way. So it's okay to feel how you feel and to express it, but to a certain extent. So yes, we do need to do some coaching with him and sit him down and talk to him, but hopefully he can address the student body, of course, as he's running, for a position, that he should take responsibility as well as we do.
Okay, but I'm hearing really general stuff here, and as an administrator, I deal with, you have after-school detention, you have to do this is the reason why,
No, I think we
etc.
have a
So
meeting
I'm
with
not-
him, and he apologizes to the student body. That's it. I mean, I don't think anything else is needed, because then it would seem kind of excessive or unfair.
I don't know who was next, Ash, Joe?
I'm just gonna say no detention, no apology. To ask him to apologize is asking Dr. Martin Luther King to apologize for his "I Have a Dream" speech. Some
That's
people right
different.
after would say his
What do I
speech
do
was
about the
hate-filled.
craziness of the assembly? It really, really got out of hand. And there were threats, there were assaults that occurred before. Many more teachers, there were a few teachers in there, I think John was in there, but in fact, you had to go running in to stop things. So whether and again, I don't know, maybe other students also have to be disciplined as a result of what went on in there. But we're dealing with him right now. Joe?
I was just going to ask you, as a matter of a question, is there any specific policies on point within the school that he's violated, knowing what we know now?
Well, it looks like he was, because he has the handbook that not only he signs, but his parents sign as well, and he has to conduct himself peaceably. So, it looked like initially freedom of expression. I'm going to say in running for student council, these are my views, etc. But then he got really crazy, and he instigated what could have resulted in really a lot more injury than it was. Again, there were lots of threats, some assaults. Nobody got really hideously hurt, but it looks like he's not conducted himself properly as student. We haul students out of class, and they get detention or suspension for something like this. In addition, he's also appears to have violated a criminal statute. Disturbing school assembly is a criminal statute in Massachusetts. I think John had his hand, and then I'll go to you, Mindy.
Yeah, I would, and it's kind of our fault here, as we've said before, but all of them, the kids who were fighting Ann Randall should have at least a week-long suspension.
A week suspension.
That's what I would.
Okay.
I don't think he should be suspended. Although, it has caused trouble, but we have to see that he relied on the gym teacher who helped him with the speech.
So fire me then.
No.
That's coming. Different hearing.
So he shouldn't be suspended. Maybe there are other ways we could deal with him, but not no detention, no suspension at all.
Okay.
Just on the point that you had said, I think it's important that we look at a couple of things here. First, if in fact he did violate a criminal statute, do we have any problem giving him an administrative penalty? And I'm assuming we don't. Have we consulted with the law enforcement in this case? Is he going to be charged criminally?
Exactly, and that's an issue I want to discuss as well.
And if so, in either direction there, I think another thing that we really need to look at, and I would suggest that we should look at, is that given the fact that there were other people, he was the source of this conduct that created this, and there were other people that actually, there was some injuries, whether they were minor or not.
So I may be calling other people to the office as well, not just him.
Right, and I think we need to look at, if we're going to send a message in that direction as to this conduct is not appropriate, we need to make sure that his punishment is to at least the level, if not higher, than the conduct punishments that we're going to give to other people, if possible, for these assaults. Because, I mean, he's the cause of this issue that occurred in the first place.
Now, I hear he's a great student, John, and you're the one that espoused suspension before. Doesn't he have some sort of right to be here? Does he have a right to education? I want to talk about his rights right now.
Yes, and he has a right to to have a hearing and to give us his side of the story, I think. But
what's the nature of his right in terms of being in school?
Yeah, I think that's a basic right that he has to public education.
When you say a basic right, has it been decided by any of the courts, by the SJC, by the U.S. Supreme Court, whether or not a student has a fundamental right to education? I think Patricia was first.
He could actually have an in-school suspension where all his assignments.
But that wasn't my question, and we'll get to that, and that's certainly.
So he has a right to an education, and something should be provided for him during that time.
Does he? Does he? Ash, does he have a right to an education?
Each student does not have a fundamental right to education that's guaranteed by the Constitution. They have an equal.
And what case is that?
McDuffie.
As cited in the case that you read.
Which was Joe, the superintendent.
That's right, right. And is it, U.S. Supreme Court has also held as well in the San Antonio School District versus Rodriguez. So it's not a fundamental right, but I agree with John too, that obviously there's some right to be in
A
school.
student has a right of equal opportunity to an adequate education. That's it. A right
Right.
which he may or he or she may lose by conduct seen to be detrimental to the community as a whole.
So, but in terms of procedural due process, yes, it's not a fundamental right, but he does have some right to education.
Yes.
And because of that, you know, we ask in procedural due process first, what's the nature of the right? That's why I was asking that. So, you know, is process, what right does he have? Yeah, he has this liberty right to be here, but it's tempered with, you know, what he did, etc. So, you know, he's only a student. He's not going to be, and we'll talk about what Joe brought up early. He's not going. His liberty is not going to be constrained. He doesn't have to be put somewhere, conceivably, you know, jailed, etc. as a result of this act. But again, he has a minimal due process right. So the process that we then should give him, you know, and I used the word, I said notice before. You know, I'm going to call him down here. Is that all I need to do? So if we decide here that we're going to suspend him, as John said, for a week, say 10 days, okay, what's the minimum that we as a school board faculty have to give him? Joe?
He needs to, I mean, he's entitled to some sort of a name clearing hearing, so he can come in and it could be an informal process in front of you where he gets to
Exactly, so that, I mean, the minimum is, that could be done today.
Sure.
Have Nadej, my vice principal, bring him to me, you know, call him out of class, say, Rendell, you're going home today for 10 days. That's his notice. Rendell could immediately, right then, I'll hear you, you know, and he could talk about his freedom of expression, whatever he wants to do, but in any event, he's suspended for 10 days. Right? So it's the minimum notice opportunity to be heard.
And that's the
that he
rational
gets.
basis test.
Well, it's procedural due process. So what we're looking at in procedural due process, it's actually not a juvenile case. That's you guys that had con law. Come on.
What is the question?
The leading case. That's the three-part test looking at the nature of the rights involved. In order to determine what procedural due processes do. It's not ringing a bell. Is it Goldberg v. Kelly? Does that ring a bell? I don't know if it's that case. That's why I'm whispering it.
Oh, was the person deprived of, you mean the 3 steps?
Yes.
Oh, was the person deprived of life? Something.
No,
it was
not.
it was like there's 3 steps.
Will you look at the nature of the interest at stake? All right, hold this thought, because when we read In Re Robert, which is an SJC juvenile law case, it refers to that test. So we'll get to that. But procedural due process is what we're talking about. So we're looking at the nature of the rights in order to determine, you know, how much process do you give? And because it's a student, all right, that has some right, but it's not, as you guys said, it's not a fundamental right to be at school. The school has the right to suspend and even expel. Okay, but with expel, you're upping the ante, right? So you're having more rights in terms of the hearing to expel. That's this little chart that I gave you. So all of that is 7137H. 37H and a half, which had nothing to do with anything you read so far, we'll get to that later on, is different, but it really impairs, involves, directly, perhaps in some case violates students' rights, because students under 37H and a half can be suspended and ultimately expelled for an act that they did that was not in school. So while we were discussing Randall and what he did, and is it a violation of peaceful assembly, which could conceivably be criminal, suppose that Randall was charged with rape, or was charged with manslaughter for an event that occurs, you know, totally after school, nothing to do with school. Under 37H and a half, the administration can keep him from going to school if his continued presence, and that's a test in H and a half, has a substantial detrimental effect, something like that, on the rest of the student body. That came about, and I forgot his name. It was a kid out of, I think, Billerica, who had been charged with either murder or manslaughter, and I think his dad was charged too, when I remember. And that was before H&1 was passed, and the school board, you know, either suspended or expelled him, I can't remember. And there was an uproar over that and his rights to be in school and whatever. So the legislature, which always reacts, right, ended up passing H&1. But again, under H&1, the students have more procedural due process rights. Now, Joe mentioned before the criminal end of it. So the school has a right to do, you know, the disciplinary stuff with him, as long as we're affording him the procedural rights, Goss v. Lopez, 37H. Totally apart from that, we might, you know, call the police in. Right? 272, I think it's 272 section 40. You don't really need to know, which is a general laws of Massachusetts, makes criminal this impairing, this disturbing school assembly. You see that a lot in the delinquency complaints. The school ends up, you know, students that for whatever reason are just uncontrollable at school. They'll have the police also charge them with disturbing school assembly. Now, you guys read Commonwealth v. Stone, right? That was the last case for today. All right. So, is there something wrong with a child that's
being punished twice?
Punished twice, and is it punishment twice? No, it's not. While when you're prosecuted as a delinquent, certainly double jeopardy applies if there's been any double jeopardy issues within that prosecution. But to get a punishment, you know, such as suspension or detention, and to get a delinquency complaint arising out of the same offense is not double jeopardy. So that's why the school law and juvenile delinquency law, juvenile justice law certainly, you know, coincides. And you'll hear the quote, the other way around, the school to prison pipeline talked about. So very, very important, this interaction between the school systems, you know, school, the family, and the children as well. Any questions? I think we're finished with this part of the course. That means we start on Tuesday with the actual Mass statute, the care and protection proceedings, and I'm going to have you all, you don't have to switch places geographically in the classroom, you can if you want. But so I had initially Richard, Joe, Lester, children, right? Children's viewpoint, so you'll switch to say state. All right.
State.
Okay. And then it was Ash, Tim.
We were the parents.
Cassandra.
Yep.
And Nadej. Okay, so now you're
The
children's council, and then the rest of the class from Jadida down, you are now
The
parents. Okay. So parents, children, state. So read the Mass statute. Tuesday will be more of an overview. There's really not, well, there is a lot of reading in terms of looking at the statute, but not case law. It's the sections of the statute and then the article on family intervention. So we'll start with that on Tuesday. Thank you. Good job, everybody.